People were lining up along the edge of the floor, waiting for their turn. The line formed naturally, like it did every session, with students spacing themselves out evenly, toes just behind the tape mark on the wood. Someone at the front, a senior student with a red belt tied tight around his waist, pointed toward the back and told Bruce Lee to stand there. His voice was firm but casual, the way you'd direct a newcomer. Bruce nodded once, a small acknowledgement, and stepped into the last spot without a word. He positioned himself squarely, feet shoulder-width apart. As the line moved forward one by one, he stayed exactly where he was, not inching up even when gaps opened. The room was a plain training hall, the sort you'd find tucked away in a community center or an old warehouse converted for martial arts classes. The wood floor was polished from years of footwork, scuffed in places where drills happened most often, with a faint creak under heavier steps. Mirrors lined one wall from floor to ceiling, reflecting the group back at themselves, making the space feel twice as big and twice as full. A few punching bags hung in the corner, swaying slightly from a recent hit, their chains rattling softly now and then. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a steady, even glow that washed out colors a bit, and the air carried that familiar mix of sweat and rubber mats, thick after an hour or two of practice. Windows were high up, letting in slants of afternoon light that caught dust particles floating lazily. Mats were laid out in the center, thick blue ones stacked in a square for demonstrations or rotations, edges curling up slightly from wear. They muffled the thuds of feet landing during jumps or takedowns. About 20, maybe 25 students stood in that line, a mix of faces you'd see in any group class. Mostly younger guys in their late teens or early 20s, wearing loose gi that hung baggy on slimmer frames or stretched over broader shoulders, paired with plain t-shirts damp at the collars. A couple of older ones were there too, men in their 40s perhaps, with calloused hands and steady postures, the kind who'd been coming for years, not chasing belts but consistency. One had a knee brace visible under his pants. Another wiped his brow with a towel draped over his neck. The instructor was a stocky man, built solid, like he'd spent decades on the mats himself, holding a clipboard with names scribbled in pencil. He stood at the front, voice clear and even, calling out each person one by one for sparring rounds or technique checks. Next, Ramirez, show me your side kick. The called student would step onto the mat, demonstrate, get a nod or a quick correction, then rejoin the line. Everyone wanted their slot before the energy dropped. That point in the class where legs got heavy and focus blurred. You could hear the occasional grunt from the mat, the slap of skin on pads, or quiet encouragement from the sidelines. The line shuffled forward patiently, people adjusting their stances, flexing fingers, keeping loose. Bruce remained at the end, part of the scene but separate in his stillness, as the process continued without rush. Bruce stood at the end of the line, arms hanging relaxed at his sides, hands open, fingers slightly curled the way they do when you're not thinking about them. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor ahead, not staring hard, just resting there, following the grain of the wood or the edge of the nearest mat. He didn't shift his weight from one foot to the other like some people do when they're waiting too long. He didn't cross his arms or lean against the wall. He simply stood, breathing in and out at an even rhythm you could almost feel if you were close enough. When the instructor called the next name, the person right in front of Bruce took one step forward onto the mat without looking back. The gap opened for a second, then closed as the line shuffled up. Bruce stayed exactly where he was. No inching, no small adjustment to close the space. The next person moved, then the next. Each time someone stepped away for their turn, the line shortened from the front and reformed a little tighter. But Bruce remained the last point, unmoved. Small conversations floated through the group, the kind that happen when people are waiting their turn and trying to stay loose. One guy near the middle asked the person beside him, "You going to that tournament next month?" The other answered quietly, "Yeah." If my knee holds up. Someone else laughed softly about a bad sparring round from last week. He caught me with that hook, man. I saw stars. A few quick glances drifted toward the back of the line. Someone would turn their head just enough to see Bruce standing there, still and quiet, then look forward again. Another pair of eyes flicked over, held for half a second, then away. No one said anything to him or about him out loud. The glances were brief, almost accidental, but they kept happening. Minutes stretched on, rounds finished on the mat. One student threw a few kicks, got a correction from the instructor, plant your back foot more, wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, and walked back to rejoin near the front. New people stepped in from the sides to fill gaps as others rotated out. The line shortened to maybe 15, then stretched back to 20 as fresh faces joined. Through all of it, Bruce stayed at the very end. He didn't raise a hand when someone else got called. He didn't step closer to the action or try to catch the instructor's eye. He didn't fidget or check the clock on the wall. He just waited, posture steady, expression calm, like the wait itself wasn't something to fight against. The air in the room grew warmer, heavier with effort. You could hear the steady slap of feet on mats, the occasional sharp exhale during a strike, the low murmur of instructions. Bruce remained part of the line, but apart from its rhythm, always the final position, always still while everything else kept shifting forward around him. After a while, the rhythm of the class started to feel different, though nothing loud or obvious announced it. One of the students near the middle, a lean guy in a faded black t-shirt, still breathing a little hard from his last round, finished his turn on the mat. He threw a quick combination, got a short, "Good, but drop your hands next time," from the instructor, then walked off the mat like usual. Normally, he would have stepped right back into his spot near the front of the line, filling the space as it opened. This time he slowed his step. He passed the next person waiting to go up, but instead of sliding back in, he paused. His feet stopped moving forward. He turned his head just enough to look toward the end of the line, toward where Bruce still stood, unchanged, arms loose, eyes calm on the floor. The pause lasted only a second or two, longer than a normal glance, but enough that the person behind him noticed and hesitated too. Another student caught it. A broader-shouldered guy with sweat darkening the shoulders of his gi looked over his shoulder, then held his gaze back there a beat longer. The movement was small, barely a tilt of the head, but the line felt the ripple, the smooth, automatic shuffle forward that had carried everyone along for the past 20 minutes or so, suddenly hesitated. It wasn't a full stop. The instructor still called the next name, and the guy at the very front stepped up onto the mat without missing a call. But the energy in the room shifted in a quiet way. The forward momentum that had been pulling the group along like a current slowed down. Someone near the center muttered something low to the person standing next to him, words too soft to carry far. Maybe just, "He's still back there," or something similar. A couple more heads turned, not all at once, but one after another in a slow wave. One student adjusted his stance, shifting his weight as if deciding whether to step forward or hold. Another wiped his face with the hem of his shirt, using the motion to steal another look toward the back. The line wasn't breaking apart or arguing. No one raised their voice or pointed. It just wasn't flowing the same anymore. People were holding their places a little longer than before, feet planted instead of sliding up. The gaps that used to close quickly stayed open, a fraction longer. The instructor glanced up from his clipboard, sensing the change in pace without saying anything about it yet. He called another name, and that student moved forward, but slower, almost waiting for something unspoken. Glances kept drifting back, quick ones, then longer ones. The room stayed quiet except for the usual sounds. The thud of feet on mats, the instructor's steady corrections, the soft exhale of someone catching their breath. But underneath it all, the line had started to feel the weight of that one person who hadn't moved an inch, who hadn't asked or pushed or shown any sign of impatience. And that stillness was beginning to pull attention in the opposite direction, from where it had been going all class. Then it started, slow at first, like a current changing direction without anyone forcing it. One student, a taller one who'd just come off the mat, still wiping sweat from his temples with the back of his wrist, didn't step forward to fill the empty space at the front like he normally would. He finished his turn, got the instructor's quick, solid form, tightened the guard, and instead of walking straight back to his usual spot near the middle, he turned around. He walked back a few paces through the line, passing 2 or 3 people who were still facing forward. He stopped beside Bruce, not in front of him, not trying to take a place ahead, just next to him, quietly planting his feet so that now there were 2 at the end instead of 1. He crossed his arms loosely, eyes on the mat, saying nothing. Another followed almost right after. A shorter guy with taped wrists and a G-sleeve rolled up to the elbows looked once toward the back, saw the taller one standing there, and made his choice. He stepped out of his position in the middle of the line, careful not to bump anyone, and moved behind them. He didn't push or rush. He just fell in at the new end, creating a small cluster that was now growing in the opposite direction. No one announced what was happening. There was no big discussion or raised voices, just one person at a time deciding to drift back. The original front of the line stayed put for a moment, a few guys still facing the instructor, waiting for the next call. But confusion started to show in small ways, shoulders shifting, heads turning sideways. One student at the front glanced back over his shoulder, saw the growing group behind Bruce, and paused mid-step when his name was called. Another lowered his hands from where he'd been shadowboxing lightly, watching instead of moving up. Then the instructor looked over from his clipboard. He noticed the line wasn't advancing the same way anymore. The steady forward pull had stalled. People weren't closing gaps as quickly. He paused, pen hovering, eyes scanning the rearranged group. He didn't interrupt or correct it right away. He just watched for a second, like he was reading the room. More started moving. A couple of the younger guys near the middle exchanged a quick look, then both stepped back together, walking past the ones still facing front. An older student, the one with the knee brace, didn't even hesitate. He simply turned in place and took a step backward, joining the line that was forming behind Bruce. Some walked past others who were still undecided. Some just pivoted where they stood. It spread quietly, person by person, like a wave rolling the opposite way. The line wasn't dissolving or fighting. It was reforming itself, pulling toward the back instead of pushing toward the front. Within those moments, the shape of the group had changed. What used to be a straight line pointing toward the mat now curved the other direction. Bruce stood where he always had, still at the end of what had been the line, but now that end had become something else entirely. The others had moved to him, one quiet step at a time, until the whole room's attention and order had shifted without a single word being spoken about it. Within a couple minutes, the whole group had rearranged itself completely. The line that had once stretched straight toward the mat now pointed the other way. Bruce was no longer at the back. He stood in what had quietly become the front, with every other student lined up behind him, some close, some a step farther, but all of them there by choice. The taller guy who had moved first stood just to his side, arms still loosely crossed. The shorter one with the taped wrists was right behind, then the older student with the knee brace, then the rest, one after another, until the entire room's order had flipped without anyone giving an order. Bruce didn't acknowledge the change with a look or a nod. He didn't turn around to see who was there or count how many had moved. His eyes stayed on the mats ahead, posture the same as it had been the whole time, shoulders relaxed, feet planted, breathing even. The instructor lowered his clipboard for a moment, scanned the new formation, and let the silence sit. No one spoke. The usual small sounds of the room, the creak of the floor, the soft swing of a punching bag chain, someone clearing their throat, felt louder in that pause. When the instructor finally spoke again, his voice was the same steady tone as before. He nodded toward the center mat, a simple gesture that meant, "Next." Bruce stepped forward quietly, one foot then the other, onto the blue padding. He stopped in the middle, faced the instructor, and waited. No one rushed past him. No one tried to slide in front or call out that they were ready. The students behind him stayed where they were, feet still, eyes forward. The room held its breath until Bruce moved into position. Only then did the rhythm pick up again, someone exhaling, a gi rustling, the soft shuffle of the new second person adjusting stance. The rest of the class continued from there. The instructor called the next turn the same way he always did. The line advanced one by one, but now it flowed from where Bruce stood. When his demonstration finished, a few clean movements, a quick exchange, the instructor's short "good" and a small correction, Bruce stepped off the mat and took his place at the new back without comment. The next person moved up, only after he had settled. Everything ran smoothly again, just in the opposite direction from how it had started. No one talked about what had happened. No one pointed it out or laughed or asked questions. The shift stayed quiet, part of the room's air, like the smell of sweat or the dust in the light beams. People finished their turns, wiped their faces, drank from water bottles along the wall. The class moved toward its end, the way it always did. He had been placed at the back of the line. He didn't move forward. The line moved to him instead.